Hi, my name is Dale Leckie. Welcome to Explore Alberta through the eyes of Alberta explorers. I'm the author of the Scenic Geology of Alberta, and I'm going to host tonight's event, the first event. There is a second one, and Sarah will be hosting that one. I live in Calgary, so it's my great pleasure to be able to work with 5 great Alberta authors who are also Alberta explorers. And the interesting thing about all this is we are exploring Alberta from different perspectives. And I really like that. I'm glad we all got together. So the other explorers, the other authors are George Webber. He's a renowned Alberta documentary photographer. Andrew Nugara is a teacher, a climber, a hiker, and a guidebook author. Sarah Elmeligi is known for her grizzly bear research and their interaction with humans. Lori Beattie is Calgary's urban explorer and a guide for regular trips to the Rockies. And I think she's pretty soon going to start going into the prairies too. So that's pretty neat. Chris Fisher, who will be joining us in a little while, is a wildlife specialist with several best-selling bird, animal, and reptile books to his credit. And then we've also got, and we're honored to have Steve Spear, the documentary photographer, who's going to be introducing and interviewing George Webber in a little while. And then there's me, Dale Leckie, and I'm going to talk about the origins of Alberta's scenic landscapes from a geological perspective. Basically, what I'm doing is telling people about the science of scenery in terms they could understand. So this evening, each author will introduce their way of seeing Alberta and introduce their books about the province. For tonight's events, I'd like to remind you, turn off your audio, turn off your video, except when you're speaking. So if you've got questions later on, or just then you could put your audio on. If you have questions, we'd like you to put them in the chat box, and we'll address a few after each presentation, and then the balance after all the presentations are done, going up until it's time to quit just before 7 o'clock. I'd like to remind everyone that there is a second event in which myself and Chris Fisher, the wildlife biologist, will have a discussion about the interesting relationships between geology and wildlife in Alberta. So since Chris and I were talking about this a month and a half ago, it's got me really intrigued. It's pretty interesting. And that event is going to be hosted by Sarah Elmalidji. Both events are going to be recorded, and you can access the links after the talk. Lynn will send them out to everyone who's here. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And also, we should recognize that today is the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada. Now, you may not be aware, but there is a supply chain issue to books. So you were hearing about everything else, windshields, tires, computer chips, but there's a paper supply issue, printing supply issue, and trucking delays, which is affecting book deliveries, making them harder to get. So if you're planning on buying any of our books or any other books, the bookstores are recommending that you do so early. Otherwise, there's a strong chance that the Christmas rush could be interesting and frustrating. And that's not a pitch to immediately run out and buy our books. Yes, we would like that, but we keep seeing these reminders, and it's occurring in the news. Next, I'd like to introduce Steve Spear, who, following me, will be introducing and interviewing the renowned documentary photographer George Webber. Steve Spear is a respected photographer and teacher on his own. His work is hung in many corporate offices and private residences, nationally and internationally. He studied photography at the Alberta College of Art in the early 1960s, returned there in 2008 to be a sessional instructor.
Not 1980s, Dale, I'm not that old.
Oh, what did I just say? Get used to it as I talk through the evening. Sometimes words just slip in like a word.
That's quite all right.
In the early 80s. Sorry. Thank you for that. And then Steve's published 2 photography books, one in rural China, which is interesting, China, Guangdong Province Portfolio, and another on the visual history of commercial real estate in Calgary. That one's called Building on the Bow, Landmarks of Calgary Commercial Real Estate. I'd like to mention at this time, just before I turn it over to Steve, is that George Weber's book, who was our first speaker, he's going to be interviewed. George's book, Borrowed Time, Calgary, 1976 to 2019, will not be available until November, but you're going to get a peek at it tonight. So at that point, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dale. So just as a bit of preamble, so I've known George Weber as a friend and fellow photographer for decades. I've admired his original photographs in multiple gallery exhibits, and I own at least a half a dozen of his books. Today, we're going to talk about photography as lifestyle and the important role it plays in George's life. And then we'll also delve a little bit into what drives George's photographic vision as it pertains to some of his book projects. So to start, let's talk about photography as lifestyle. So question number one, George, how has photography impacted your life and how has it shaped the person that you are today?
Well, you know, I think the act of making photographs is really deeply connected with a sense of respect or affection for what you're seeing. And as was mentioned just a little bit earlier, I've been photographing the people, the social landscape, the architecture of the Canadian West for about 45 years. And photography has been a tool that's carried me into intimate places like First Nations communities, Hutterite colonies, inner city hotels, and the like. And it's you know, my highest aspiration in the work that I do is to create something which is going to you know, to be a bit of a legacy. These are the covers of the books that Steve was alluding to, and as you can see, they relate to Hutterite communities, First Nations communities, small town Alberta, the architecture, and the natural landscape of the Canadian West.
And I'll let everyone know, I own all of these books, soon to have Borrowed Time added to my collection.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of question number two, George, I know that Henry Cartier-Bresson is a photographer who has influenced you greatly, and I know there was a kind of an epiphanic moment when his work impacted your direction. Could you describe a little bit about that moment of epiphany?
Sure. For any of you that don't know Cartier-Bresson, you know, he frequently is listed in the pantheon of the greatest photographers of all time. He was a pioneer of street photography, a pioneer of working very simply with, you know, very basic lenses and the like. And I saw his work. I was determined to be a writer. I picked up a book of Cartier-Bresson's photographs almost 45 years ago. And by the time I'd gotten through the book, I knew in my heart of hearts that photography was going to be my career. And it's Cartier-Bresson's capacity to enter into situations very lightly and unobtrusively, and to pull little slivers of beauty, poetry, and magic out of the scene that has been something that I've been deeply inspired to and aspire to achieve in my own work, Steve.
So and to that point, when you consider the content of your numerous books, it's evident that the subjects have been visited and revisited, sometimes over decades. So this is not random photography. It implies commitment and dedication. Can you give us an idea as to why your project-oriented approach to photography is so important to you as a photographer and as a human?
Well, you know, I found that over the years, we're looking at some architectural work here, and so, you know, I'm kind of a slow learner, Steve. I guess that's a big part of it. It takes me a while for people to warm up to me and for me to sort of understand what I'm doing. But in reference to people entering into a Hutterite community or a First Nations community, those are very difficult places to gain access to and earn the trust and respect of the people. I feel that there's dues to be paid, essentially, in terms of you know, earning the trust of the people that you're going to photograph. Now, what we're looking at here now, it's a different sort of a thing, but it also involves time. And you know, I think in photography, you have to pay for photographs, right? I mean, you have to bring something to creating the photograph. And I think for me, the currency that photographers who do the kind of work that I do are asked to pay is time. We're looking at a series of photographs that Lynn is sharing right now. This is from a book called Alberta Book. It took me 39 years to do the photographs in this book. Now, like I said, I'm a bit of a slow learner. You know that already, Steve. But part of it has to do with the fact that, you know, each one of these photographs, the particular quality of light and all of the other intangibles that make up a photograph they're there for very short periods of time. And in order to get, you know, a photograph of any of these subjects, you can't go there once on your agenda. That's Trochu. I was there probably a dozen times before the light illuminated that sign, the brick building, exactly the way that we see them in this photograph. So I think that time is really important, but I also enjoy returning over and over again, because I find that, of course, things change. And you can photograph the same thing many times. It will always reveal potentially a different side of itself with those return visits.
Yeah, and that leads in very, very nicely to the next question, George, which talk about you having been described as a visual archaeologist, and maybe you could just enlighten us a little bit about how that phrase you feel applies to you and your approach to the photography you're doing. I mean, you're visiting places time after time after time. Archaeologists do the same thing. Let's hear it from your mouth. Yeah,
well, I think it was an apt description that somebody proffered a number of years ago. You know, what does an archaeologist do? An archaeologist collects little bits of things, shards of things, remnants, elements of a civilization. And then if the collecting is good and the analysis is strong in terms of intuition and a sense of history, you can actually build a very intimate, deep, powerful, narratively rich story of a place from collecting little bits, you know, handfuls of little objects. When they're curated, when they coalesce, when they're interpreted correctly and sensitively, they can tell you a lot about the values, the economic history, the social conditions, all of those things which are very revealing about a particular time and place.
So, and thinking of, do you feel you have a responsibility to the people and places that you're photographing?
Yeah, I think it's a big responsibility. You know, it's photographers enter into situations. There's a really uneven power dynamic, right? The photographer gets to choose when the photograph is made, how the photograph is made, which photographs are going to be shared. You know, so it's you have a great degree of power to present people respectfully or not so when you're photographing. And I think that as much as possible when I'm photographing people, or it relates to architecture as well, I try to work really simply, intuitively, directly, so that it's really a collaboration between me and the subject. I'm not trying to work the subject. I'm not trying to sensationalize what I'm photographing. I'm trying to do it neat. I'm trying to do it simple. I'm trying to do it with a certain degree of grace and respect. And I think there's a huge responsibility, because you can really skew things depending on what you shoot, how you shoot, and then how you ultimately present that work.
Yeah, and looking at like the photos that Lynn is showing right now, they're all photographs of places and architecture, but I know from the images of people in the books that you've done, like People of the Blood or the Prairie Gothic, like you look at the people in those pictures and there's an obvious sense of connection with you as a photographer being on the other side of the lens. And I think credibility and humanity plays into that role in a big way. So in terms of the you're being allowed into these people's lives, it's a special thing. You know, you get to share it up front. We get to share it after the fact, and I think that's remarkable. So like Cartier-Bresson, the images in these books capture moments as they are occurring. And these are more static images, but I'm thinking more of the people pictures. So
yeah,
like
Lynn, let me just interrupt for
Yeah.
just a moment, Steve. Lynn, are you comfortable shifting forward to the borrowed time images? I'm not quite sure where we're at. I'm certainly comfortable to do that. And I think many of the points that Steve is making and will continue to make, I think might be more powerfully explained through those photographs. So
yeah, and while she's doing that, George, maybe
Yes.
you could talk a little bit, like I was going to allude to your comfort with the technology that you're using. You're not thinking about your photo gear. Do you have a favorite camera and lens combination that you like to use for these types of imagery?
Well, without getting techie, and you're right, Steve, and this is an influence also of the French photographer you mentioned at the beginning of our session here, Cartier-Bresson. I almost always work with what is referred to as a normal lens. And for any of you that are not photographers, a normal lens is a lens which replicates the scene that you're photographing very close to the way that the unaided human eye would see the scene. So whether I'm working with a Leica film camera or a Nikon digital camera or a Hasselblad camera, the camera format is of sort of secondary importance to me, but the through thread with all of the work is working with these standard or normal focal length lenses. This photograph for me is satisfying for a number of reasons. Of course, when you look at it, it's a piece of Calgary. It's an iconic thing. It's from the Calgary Stampede. It's kind of comic. It's kind of funny. It's kind of colorful. But I hope that when somebody looks at this photograph now, or perhaps in the future, they consider peeling back a couple of layers. So what do you actually see in this photograph? Well, on the surface, it looks like a guy down at the Stampede having a good time. Then you take a second look and you see he's carrying this giant plastic pink magenta donut. If I got my color described correctly there, Steve. That's a petrochemical product. That thing was probably made in China. That thing was shipped over to Canada in a cargo vessel. That thing is going to be taken home. It's going to be in the recycle system here after his kid jumps on it with her spurs on. He's carrying in his left hand there a couple of disposable plastic, short-term usable things that are also made with petrochemical products. His eyeglasses, the paint on the background scene and everything. So this photograph, I think, in 50 or 100 years from now, people will say, God, look at all the stuff that these guys used and lived with and was part of their daily life in that culture. We see it, we think this is just normal life. But this speaks on some level very powerfully about the omnipresent, powerful role of petrochemical products in our culture, essentially, right? And while this looks kind of normal now, in 50 or 100 years from now, this is going to seem like an incredibly strange, bizarre moment harvested from this point in time. Thanks for your patience, Steve.
Hey, no problem. So I know we're kind of on to borrowed time imagery, but the last two questions that I had, I wondered if we could talk a little bit about your book, Prairie Gothic, which is one of my favorites in my George Weber collection.
Thanks, Steve.
So a lot of your work comes from being on the road. How often do you revisit locations?
So this is a photograph that I think touches on what you've mentioned here, Steve.
Yes.
Over the years, I do go back over and over. Now, this particular couple is an example of something that's a little unusual for me, but it's magic. In this particular situation, I met Mr. and Mrs. Chu in a little town called New Dayton. I'll just try to encapsulate briefly their story, because their story and this photograph, which was taken over 30 years ago, is why I continue to be fascinated by photography and inspired and moved by it. This couple were married. They were married in China in 1930. They had an infant daughter. They decided that their life would be better in Canada, but they had to sort of separate. She was going to stay with their young daughter, an infant, and she was also expecting a second child at the time. Charlie came to the little community of New Dayton. established this business with his father because of immigration laws, economic setbacks, and a number of things. They didn't see each other from 1931 until 1986. This couple didn't lay eyes on each other for 55 years, right? They were reunited. Ultimately, that's the thing. It's that narrative impulse.
George, that was just amazing. I've got one of your books. What I like about that is you help us with those amazing photographs and you show us how you explore Alberta, your perspective. You're truly preserving pieces of Alberta's delicate history. So congratulations on that. Hey, we're going to move on now. And our next speaker is going to be Andrew Nugara. And Andrew was born in Rugby, England, and moved to Canada in 1979. I'm kind of intrigued. Rugby, England, that's good. He teaches high school physics, mathematics, and music. He's the author of numerous best-selling guidebooks published by Rocky Mountain Books, including More Scrambles in the Canadian Rockies, A Beginner's Guide to Snowshoeing in the Canadian Rockies, Snowshoeing in the Canadian Rockies, Family Walks and Hikes in the Canadian Rockies, and Popular Snowshoe Trails in the Canadian Rockies. If you are going to go into the mountains at all, you're going to pick up one of Andrew's books. His newest book, just released this spring, is Popular Day Hikes, the Castle and Crowsnest, which covers 37 of the best trails north of Alberta's Waterton National Park. So he's truly an outdoorsman. Over to you, Andrew.
Great. Thank you so much, Dale. And just to answer your question, yeah, Rugby is a little town in England, and that's where the sport was invented. They named the sport after the town. So that's, and I'm a terrible rugby player, absolutely atrocious. So thank you. Let me share my screen here. That one there. Thank you so much for having me on this presentation tonight. I'm quite honored, and thank you everyone for being here with us, especially on this day of truth and reconciliation. And I hope we've all had an opportunity to reflect on those two words and how important they are, and that they are action words, and we all need to do our part. So I'm really honored to be here and share my experience of Alberta, which is through the Canadian Rockies. And like Dale, I moved to Steve, sorry, one of you said you moved to Canada in 1979. I moved here in 1979. I didn't actually climb my first mountain until 2001. I've experienced Alberta through three different ways: through scrambling, through snowshoeing, and through hiking. And I didn't do my first mountain until 2001. And the only reason I made it to the mountains was because my brother discovered this amazing book called Scrambles in the Canadian Rockies by Alan Kane. So this is the book that we bought in 2001. We got completely addicted to scrambling in the Canadian Rockies, and we'd spend our week pouring through this book, and then on the weekends ascending these mountains. And we started doing a lot of mountains that weren't in his book. This is Alan Kane's third edition. We started doing different mountains, and by about 2005, we had enough mountains that I could write my own book. Now, I had no intention of writing any books whatsoever. I have a music degree and I teach physics and math, and so writing books was not really in the cards for me. But when my brother suggested it, I really didn't have a reason why I couldn't do it. So I started writing a book, and Rocky Mountain Books, which is a fantastic book publisher to work with. They published my first book, More Scrambles in the Canadian Rockies, in 2007, and then I followed that with followed it up in 2012 with a second edition, and a third edition in 2016, and the fourth edition is on its way. I'm still working on it. I'm still doing trips, but it's going to be hopefully out in 2023. I'm really excited about that one. The first question people have about scrambling is, what on earth is scrambling? And it has nothing to do with eggs, obviously. Scrambling, in its broadest definition, is getting to the top of a mountain by non-technical means. In other words, no ropes, no harnesses, no climbing protection, which makes it sound really dangerous. But in fact, it's not. It's because usually the mountains we climb are not steep enough or challenging enough to require technical equipment. Now, there's a very gray area there, which I'll just talk about briefly. Sometimes you have to use your hands to ascend the rock. That's really what scrambling is using your hands as opposed to hiking. Scrambling involves long sections of steep hiking, often not on a trail. And the nice thing about scrambling is it allows you to move really fast because you're not roped together, and you can see a huge variety of terrain in a very short amount of time. And the scenic rewards of scrambling are phenomenal. And there's an example right there. This is from the top of Mount Alderson. This is one of the Alan Kane's scrambles in Waterton National Park. It's just got a phenomenal summit view. So I love scrambling because it's not just it was about the journey or it was about the destination. It's about both. You get rewarded during the journey, and you get rewarded with the destination. You get to have your cake and eat it when you are scrambling. Here's another picture that's going to be from my new book of a scene in Waterton near Sage Pass. And just so you have a visual representation of what scrambling is, here on the left we have an example of what easy scrambling is. Steep hiking, no trail, often there's no trail. Yeah, moderate scrambling is obviously more technical. You got to use your hands a little more, but it's generally pretty safe. Difficult scrambling is, as you can see, it's on very steep rock, and if you fall when you're doing difficult scrambling, then there's going to be serious consequences. So that's where the gray area between scrambling and climbing comes in. Is it a scramble? Is it a climb? Very subjective thing. So now I'm just going to show some of my favorite photos from my favorite scrambles. This is my ultimate scramble. I repeated it this weekend actually with my brother. This is Crypt Peak in Waterton, and I'm sure hopefully Dale will, or I'm sure he's looking at the rock here, and the geology of Waterton and the castle above is just absolutely fascinating. It's the most beautiful place in Alberta, in my opinion. I love Waterton. So here's some more scrambling on Mount Galway, again down in Waterton. Thanks, Mike, for that photo. More scrambling. That's my brother. He's route finding. We can't go up this rock because it's too steep. That would be technical climbing. This is Bellevue Hill, and then we ended up going up this gully. So this would be an example of difficult scrambling. You were stemming the gully, we're going up. You don't want to fall here. It's not going to be pleasant if you do, and that's where maybe I need a rope, maybe I don't. But this is what we really do it for, is the summit view. So these are just some photos from the 3rd edition of More Scrambles in the Canadian Rockies. This is a photo of Marco Stavrik taken by his wife from the summit of Noceum Peak. This is one of my favorites. This is called the Onion. It's up the Icefields Parkway and it has this wonderful view of Iceberg Lake in the foreground, and the one in the background is Bow Lake. So that is the source of the Bow River. All the river that flows down the Bow comes from there. This is Roe Mountain in Waterton. Again, superb colors down in that park. This is one that we just did a month ago. It's called Greater Pharaoh Peak in the Egypt Lakes area. That was the first time I'd been there. Absolutely stunning. Loved it. Great photo by Vern DeWitt. Vern DeWitt takes amazing photos and does amazing trips. Helps me out a lot with his photography. Mount Roche in the Castle area, just north of Waterton. Again, fantastic colors, and he picked a large season to do this. And this mountain has become one of the most popular ones in the Scrambles book, and it's called Smutwood Peak, and it's because of this view here. This view of Mount Birdwood on the left and Mount Sir Douglas in the distant right, and the view from that mountain is just as good as you're going to get. You can't beat that view. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's not the greatest scramble in the world, but the view is so worthwhile. Okay, and then we go on to winter. Mark and I decided that we weren't going to hibernate like the bears in winter, so we took up the laborious activity of snowshoeing. So we started snowshoeing, did a lot of trips, and again, that turned into a bunch of books. I wrote a snowshoeing book, which was a rather challenging one, so I followed up with an easier one, Beginner's Guide to Snowshoeing in the Canadian Rockies, and then a couple of the second editions of both of those books, and then the latest one that just came out last spring or late winter was popular snowshoes in the Canadian Rockies. And again, here's some of the photos of our snowshoeing trips. Love the winter. This is the most popular snowshoeing trail in the Canadian Rockies. Is Chester Lake. We're on our way to Chester Lake. That's my brother pulling his son. And if you go to Chester Lake, you might as well go to this place called Elephant Rocks, which is just fantastic. And Chester Lake, sorry, I'm going to zip through these so I don't take up too much time. This is Forum Ridge in Waterton National Park, and this is Parker Ridge along the Icefields Parkway. Icefields Parkway, fantastic for snowshoeing. And here's a May ascent. So this, we ascended Fairview Mountain in May, and this was in our early days, and I can tell it's in our early days because of that blue thing on my backpack there. That blue thing there is a crazy carpet, and we crazy carpeted down Fairview Mountain, which seems a little childish, but boy, it was a blast. Back to the Castle area. This is called Middle Kootenay Mountain. This was a January ascent. And this was not a snowshoe ascent. So this, I just put it in because it's a good picture. This is Cathedral Mountain. It was just a fantastic day we had on Cathedral Mountain. And back to Waterton. This is an interesting photo because everything on the right side of the photo is in Canada, and everything on the left side of the photo is in the United States in Glacier National Park, Montana. And the border goes right down the middle, the U.S.-Canada border. That's called Akamina Ridge. Fantastic. And this is a common position that you will find yourself in when you're snowshoeing because, as I said, it's a laborious activity. If you want to work out, put the skis away and snowshoe because you're going to get 10 times the workout on snowshoes and you'll be 10 times more exhausted and you'll end up like that. That was on a snowshoe ascent to Mount Rondo. I think it took us 13 hours, whereas if you did that on skis, sensibly, like most people, you would probably get up and down in 8 easily. Okay, other books. So when my brother was about 40, tender age of 45, he decided it was time to have a family. He and his wife, obviously his wife doing most of the work, and they have 3 kids, and I don't have kids of my own. So what came next is, those are my 2 nephews on Bears Hump in Waterton National Park. So family hiking books. That's what I decided to work on next because I now had some young people that I could take hiking with me. And that's my nephew, Rogan there, and his cousin. And I did 2 family hiking books. Here's just some photos from those books. And that was such a great experience doing those family hiking books because, you know, you get to hang out with young people for one thing. They're mostly shorts. That was great. I could do sometimes 2 or 3 of these hikes in a day. This is a photo from, again, Fairview Mountain, and the youngest person in this photo is 6 years old. So kudos to them for getting at Fairview Mountain at age 6. The photo is by Alyssa Erickson. Same thing again, another photo by Vern DeWitt and his family on the summit of Fairview Mountain, Mount Victoria in the background. This is Sean Benbow, who's a terrific photographer. He's at Lake Annette in near Jasper. And this is Emily Doucette and her son Avon. And that became the cover of the 2nd volume. And again, some young people are so impressed with all these young people getting out and experience and doing these really long trips with a lot of elevation gain. I was so impressed with these kids. And back to a very famous area near Moraine Lake, the Valley of the 10 Peaks. This is on the way to Eiffel Lake. And another picture of some young people on Miners Peak. That's Harling Peak in the background, very famous hike that's been reconstructed recently and done extremely well. And then this is my latest book, Popular Day Hikes in the Castle and the Crow's Nest. You probably gathered I have an affinity for Southern Alberta. And the reason is in Southern Alberta, you see things like this. You see these unbelievable colors. You see the rock layers are so pronounced and so varied. The geology that is fascinating. This is a great photo taken by Matthew Clay on Table Mountain that became the cover of the book. And yeah, just colors. This red rock that you see in southern Alberta is called argillite, and because it's been exposed to oxygen, it turns red, and the stuff that hasn't been exposed to oxygen is a green grayish color, and they occur in layers. And yeah, it's just it's so beautiful visually down there. This is Lundbreck Falls, so now in the Crowsnest area, a couple of waterfalls in Crowsnest. We got Lundbreck Falls, and that's Rainbow Falls. This is one of the famous mountains in Crowsnest is Turtle Mountain. That's where the 1903 tragic event of I think 90 million tons of this mountain collapsed on the town of Frank and killed 90 people. And yeah, Frank Slide is a must-see. It's a must-see destination. And then, of course, you can scramble up Turtle Mountain to the summit and see this devastation from above. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And thank you to Matt Hobbs for that photo. And then we're back to the castle. Love the castle, just so colorful. Another great photo from Loaf Mountain by Matt Clay, and this is probably my favorite photo. I didn't take it. Vern DeWitt took this photo from Victoria Ridge in the castle area. So one of my all-time favorite places to hike is the castle of Crowsnest. And then along with that is Waterton, and as luck would have it, you get a preview of my Waterton hiking guide book, which I've just submitted to the publisher. The interesting thing about this Waterton hiking book is that I actually wrote it 4 years ago and gave it to the publisher in July of 2017. And of course, in September of 2017, half the park burned down through the Kenow fire. And so we pulled the book, obviously, it was in the publisher, it was in the editing stage, and I redid the entire book in the last couple of years. And hiking in Waterton right now is unreal. The regrowth, the colors there, the openness, because all the trees have, lots of the trees have burned down, is just phenomenal. Waterton is as stunning as you will ever see it right now. So now's the time to see Waterton, and this is what the book cover is probably going to look like. And this book will come out in hopefully May or June of 2020. And I just this is the Blackfoot name for Waterton, and it means the inner sacred lake within the mountains, which is such a great description. The indigenous names for the mountains and the areas, they're so beautifully descriptive and describe the areas perfectly. That's not Waterton Lake in the picture. Those are actually the Carthew Lakes, but Waterton Lakes are beautiful, surrounded by mountains, and yeah, to call them sacred lakes is, I think, wonderful. And there's one of the better views you're going to get in Waterton from Carthew Summit. That's Mount Alderson in the background. Yep, just as good a view there as the actual Carthew Lakes. And those colors, they're not exaggerated at all. That's exactly how they look. You'd be blown away when you go to Waterton. This is Bertha Lake. This is Crib Lake. It's twice made the National Geographic top 20 hikes in the world. So if you're looking for a great hike and you have to go through this tunnel, as my friend Nicole going through the tunnel at Crib Lake, this is Blackiston Creek, more beautiful red argillite. So we're second from the end here. This is the very famous Red Rock Canyon. Everybody visits Red Rock Canyon and everybody is stunned by it. And that's it. And these are a couple of my friends hiking through Red Rock Canyon. And yeah, that brings a close to my presentation of scrambling, snowshoeing, and hiking in the Canadian Rockies. I feel so privileged to live here and to have access to this kind of scenery and this kind of experience. So hopefully something appeals to the air and you'll get out and enjoy the Rockies the way I do. So thank you very much.
Well, Andrew, that was, again, pretty amazing. What you're showing in your scrambles, your hikes. I kept doing the geology. I was trying to focus on your scenery, but I kept drawn to the geology. And that was such a great compliment to George's Ancient Alberta Urban Shots. And then on your final slide, I really like your little phrase you had there, and I think it applies to us all here today. Audience, as well as the authors, get out there and experience it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Next, I would like to introduce Sarah Elmeligi. She's been working with bears for nearly 20 years. Now, Andrew's hikes were pretty rugged, but on the other hand, somebody who deals with grizzly bears, that's pretty rugged and risky in my mind as well. Her PhD was on grizzly bear habitat, use of hiking trails in the Rocky Mountain parks. Her research has been published in books, magazines, scientific journals, and presented around the world. Sarah Elmeligi is the author, and this looks like a really interesting book. I know what I'm buying somebody for Christmas, is the author of What Bears Teach Us, a lavishly illustrated book that explores the complex behavioral characteristics of North America's largest land carnivores by examining bear-human relationships from the bear's perspectives. And just remember, and maybe Sarah's going to say something about it, in the last week, there have been 2 major encounters in the Rocky Mountain foothills, south of Bragg Creek. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the authors who are here tonight. I'm so inspired by all the photos I've seen so far, and I can't wait to see more. I'm just going to share my screen here. I have a few slides. You can see the title slide, correct? Yeah?
You can.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so my book is called What Bears Teach Us, and this is a book of, it's a coffee table photography, science, behavior, adventure book, I guess. And so I just want to acknowledge my co-author, John E. Marriott, who took all of the photos in the book, and many of the photos you'll see on the slideshow today. So before I start talking about the book, I want to take a little bit of a step back, because I think that anytime we have an interaction with a wild animal, we come to that interaction with all of our preconceived notions and expectations of how that is going to go. And our relationship with nature and wild animals starts from the moment that we go outside. I grew up in Alberta, and I spent my childhood recreating in Alberta's parks. I knew bears were there and actually took efforts not to run into them. My mom used to buy me a Coke to get me to the top of the hike, which was always such a treat because I wasn't allowed to drink a lot of pop. And the second treat was that when I finished the Coke, I could put rocks in the can and shake it all the way on the trail. That tells the bears you're coming, my mom would say. And I still get my kids to do that now, actually. Fast forward to my adult life, and I had always believed I should never want to encounter a bear because they're dangerous and could hurt me. And that's true for sure. I mean, we've seen that this week, but it definitely isn't that simple. Over the years, I've come to learn that bears are so much more than scary stories told in the newspaper or fluffy teddy bears from TV. My master's work showed me that bears didn't always want to run away from people. And my PhD taught me that how bears select habitat around people depends on many different things, but it mostly depends on the individual bear. Throughout my research, I have learned that regardless of where you are and what the bear population is that you're working with, the human experience is an essential part of the encounter. Coexistence is defined by us, how we perceive the risk and outcomes of these encounters. Tonight, I'm going to challenge you to think about how you define coexistence, what it means to you, and what you're willing to do to get there. So what is our book about? As a scientist, I value data, and there's a ton of research about bear behavior and habitat use that the average person may not have access to. Through my work and my play, I've been blessed to spend hour upon hour with bears, watching them, writing down what they're doing, and trying to understand why they do what they do. I've been elated, mystified, scared, curious, surprised, inspired, and nervous. When I think about it, a lot of what I've learned about bears and from them come from my own personal bear stories. But it's hard to describe what it's like to look into those deep brown eyes. How could I possibly put into words the depth of emotion and decision-making that I see when I look into a bear's eyes? That's why I needed John. Our book weaves the science of bear behavior with stories from the field and John's amazing photos to bring you North America's bears in a way that maybe you've never seen them before. Patience and tolerance, I think, is one of the primary things that bears have taught me. And this is chapter 1 in the book. It's where the book idea first began to take shape in my mind. Bears, particularly those living in high human use areas, show incredible patience. I'm often amazed by how few bear attacks there actually are when I consider human behavior in bear habitat. I giggle at the thought that I would actually make a pretty bad bear because I would bluff charge too many people for violating my personal space while I was trying to eat lunch. There are many questionable things that people do to get close to a bear for a photo or a story to tell their friends. And many people get far too close. And most of the time, the bear does nothing. Few people would be so patient and tolerant as an Alberta bear if they had dozens of people closing in on them to take a photo while they were eating. Bears in these cases may even be justified in huffing and growling or even swatting people away. Yet most roadside bears continue eating or just amble away. Bears display patience and tolerance with people and other bears, but they can also become habituated or food conditioned. And to the average person recreating or living in bear habitat, these terms may seem synonymous. But to the wildlife manager, each of these terms is different and comes with a unique series of assumptions, understanding, and management actions. What makes a bear tolerant or habituated often has a lot to do with what they eat. Several chapters in our book compare coastal bears with those living in the interior because it's a completely different habitat, and that habitat dictates bear personality quite often. There are two key differences between coastal grizzly bear habitat and interior grizzly bear habitat. First, there's no salmon, and there's less food. No matter how you look at the Alberta landscape, it is subpar at best. With less food, bears need to wander larger distances to find it, which means they expend more energy. This also means there is more competition between bears. There's more at stake, and bears are less tolerant of being disturbed by other people or other bears. That brings me to another key difference, the people. So many people. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt from the book. Whether a bear is well fed or not is tied to its tolerance level, which is in turn tied to the risk of human-bear conflict. The fewer the resources, the less tolerant the bear will be to disturbance, and the higher the risk of conflict or of a bear being displaced from high-quality habitat in an effort to avoid conflict. This, however, is an oversimplification, as there is a great variation in the behaviors of individual bears. There are bears who live in the Bow Valley of Alberta who are more habituated to people than others, which can work out very well for them. It affords them access to the relatively little available high-quality habitat around human communities, especially if other bears are not willing to access it. It is dangerous, however, because once these bears leave the protection of the national or provincial parks, they are at high risk of conflict with people and will be treated differently. It also poses a safety risk to people because there is no way for us to know exactly where a bear will draw the line. A bear may appear comfortable around people, but over time, exposure to too many people may result in a bear feeling it needs to defend its berry patch. Or worse, the bear may become too comfortable around people and end up in an urban environment accessing garbage and becoming food conditioned. Bears that select habitat near people walk a fine line between success and human-bear conflict in which the bear always loses. Part of our research for the book involved going to witness how bears and people live together in other parts of North America. Lucky for me, that involved a wonderful trip to the southern Yukon. What immediately struck me was how vast the wilderness is up there. With 2 to 3 times as many bears as people, bears have all kinds of space, and that makes them different bears. It was on this trip that I began to think about what it meant to coexist and how that is different based on where you are in the world. To coexist requires adaptation. You need to adapt to being around each other, but who has to do most of the adapting depends on who is the more dominant species. In the Yukon, it wasn't people that dominated the landscape, and this changed what it meant to coexist. Okay, I have another little excerpt to accompany these 3 photos of this pretty little bear. Part of the Kluane ecosystem, Tatanshini-Alsek Provincial Park is in the very northwest corner of British Columbia. The landscape here is characterized by large mountains to the west and wide forested valleys to the east. The best bear habitat is in the valley bottom with a mosaic of forests, wetlands, and riverside meadows. As the early morning sun gently kissed the mountaintops with a pink glow, John and I sat along the roadside watching a familiar, beautiful sub-adult grizzly bear. We had been spending the last few mornings with him. Over the week, he had become more habituated to our vehicle and never showed any signs of stress or even acknowledged our presence. The sun was glimmering off the roadside grasses as he grazed on dandelions and local weed. Everything was quiet and still, except my bladder, which was full of coffee and in need of relief. I slowly opened the car door. The bear didn't even look up. I stepped out of the vehicle and closed the door behind me. The bear didn't look up. I took 2 steps away from the car. He didn't look up. I crossed the road away from the bear. No reaction. I took a step into the opposite ditch, crouched down and peed. He bluff charged. I looked over my shoulder and he was staring at me intently. I felt confused and more than a little nervous. I took a deep breath and tried to sound relaxed and non-threatening as I spoke to him in a calm voice. "Oh, hi, bear. It's okay, buddy." I stood up and walked slowly but purposefully back to the Jeep with him watching me the whole time. I put the vehicle between me and the bear, and he sidestepped to watch me get back in the car. Even though he'd had no reaction to me previously, he was clearly watching me the whole time. "He didn't like that at all," John said. Once I was back in the car, he sure didn't, but I didn't understand why. How did a bear who didn't even care about me all of a sudden get worked up enough to bluff charge? What did I do wrong? Well, I did several things he didn't predict. I didn't stay in the car like a good human. He very clearly told me I needed to get back in my box of acceptable human activity. Over the next few weeks, I played those events over and over again in my mind, trying to pinpoint what I had done. One of my colleagues suggested it was the action of crouching down in the ditch. In Russia, he had observed male bears sometimes hunching their shoulders down and lowering their head as a sign of dominance and strength. It's possible this bear thought I was challenging him, or he got concerned that suddenly he was not able to see all of my body clearly. Suddenly, I wasn't trustworthy. In the Yukon, I felt the rules were reversed. Bears have written a complex rule book for people, and when we step out of line, bears are more than happy to let us know. A lot of my book focuses on coexistence, how we live with bears. And it's especially ringing true this week as I've had 5 black bears, maybe more, I don't know, wandering around my neighborhood. There's a grizzly bear attack up in the Highwood Pass earlier this week and another one down in Blairmore. The reality is that when we live with bears, it's tough. And it means that we as people need to think about what we can do. If there's one thing that I've learned about working with bears is that it's actually pretty hard to control bears. It's a lot easier to control us. And when we work together as a community, we can have a lot of success. So for example, the bear-proof garbage bins that you see in Banff and Canmore and other communities living on this wildlife-human interface, those are really successful in making sure that bears don't get a food reward when they come into a human community. Canmore also has bylaws against outdoor compost and bird feeders and all these things. Canmore also is part of a multi-stakeholder coexistence working group that looks at coexistence with not only bears, but elk and other wildlife that sometimes cause conflict on a landscape scale, and says, how can we work together as a community of people to reduce conflict risk? So coexistence really works best. It only works when we all work together. But the last thing I really want to emphasize here is that a bear is not just a bear. Sometimes they're silly and sometimes they stare at you with daggers in their eyes. Sometimes bears make sure you know who is boss, and other times they don't even care if you're there. Research shows us that bears are individual, and so does personal experience. Research can also help us understand how bears use habitat and what is important to them as they make daily decisions about where to be and what to eat and who to be around. Experience can help us understand the personalities of each bear, even if we only see them once. Look at the 2 bears in these photos. This is the whole reason why I wanted to partner with John on this book. When you look at the black bear on the right, you can tell he's annoyed. His hackles are up, he's staring intently, He even has a furrow in his brow. The bear on the left doesn't care about you at all. At the end of the day, what bears have taught me is just to be yourself and don't be afraid to make it clear how you feel. I wrote this book to help people think about their relationship with bears and maybe to see them a little differently when they encounter them or hear other people speak of them. Bears, just like nature as a whole, have a lot to teach us. We just have to sit still long enough to listen. And with that, I'll just say thank you very much. That is all of my contact information. What Bears Teach Us is published by Rocky Mountain Books, and you can find it on their website or at an independent local bookstore near you. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll just stop sharing my slides.
Well, Sarah, that was great. Thank you very much for helping us to begin to understand. And I'm going to say for us to begin, because you spent 20 years with them, but for us to begin to understand and with emphasis on respect bears as we travel. And as we travel, we're in Alberta, sometimes even in these major urban centers, you'll hear about them being captured, usually not put down, but tranquilized in Calgary and Edmonton. So that's really good. You had great anecdotes. I love the information. You gave us just enough to tease us. And I've been thinking, who can I buy your books from for coming up? So expect the surge.
Everybody you know.
Oh, that's what I'm thinking.
All the people.
I was thinking about that. And the imagery that John gave us just to complement your stories were great. So thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Good. So our next speaker is Calgary's urban explorer. Lori Beattie is the author of the best-selling guidebook, Calgary's Best Walks, and she is the face behind Fit Frog Adventures, where she organizes and leads year-round Calgary walks, mountain hikes, and snowshoe days. She's always going. She's addicted to walking, and she admits that. She's the segment host of CTV Morning Live walks. So I think that's great, Lori. You're publicizing, you're helping people getting out to explore Calgary and day trip areas from Calgary. Calgary's Best Walks, its second edition. The second edition is a guidebook that contains 45 different walks, 40 different detours across the city of Calgary. And I know my wife and I are always using it when we're trying to decide where to go for the morning stroll. There are detailed maps that lead you on wilderness walking trails along various side streets to hidden stairways. I don't know how she finds them. Walking paths, tasty cafes, craft breweries, street art, and viewpoints. And if nothing else, I mean, it is not nothing else. I love her eclectic photos of Calgary businesses and homes. So I turn it over to you, Lori.
Thanks, Dale. Just gonna share my screen. All right. I think everybody can see this now. So welcome this evening. And I think it's time to go walkabout. I think we need to explore and discover and connect, which is what I love about walking in Calgary. I love to connect to the place and to the people. So I'm going to take you on a little tour, but first I'll give you a little overview of how my book works. So there's 45 routes. They take you into all quadrants. And because everybody has a different interest, and I like to have lots of categories for the walks. So some people like to eat or drink coffee. So we have cafe walks. Some people love big nature. So we'll head out into, the Weaselhead or Big Nose Hill walks. And some people love big views and rivers. Some people want to take their kids. So we have all of those things categorized in the book. And all the routes have about a 6-page spread where we start with all the information you're going to need, a bit of information about the area and some highlights, and of course some sidebars. But we see tea, cupcakes, books. I do write about other things other than food sometimes, but sometimes it's history, sometimes it's First Nations history. There's sidebars throughout the book, but depending on the walk. And the big ticket item in my book are the maps. It's where I spend most of my time. It's my obsession. I do not want you to get lost. Actually, I do want you to get lost. I want you to try the maps and then to head out on your own and explore and find out what's really fun about walking in a city is finding something unexpected. But what do we love about why is it so great to walk in Calgary? Well, we have these 2 rivers that give us these escarpments that we can climb up and get these amazing viewpoints all throughout the city. That was River Park. We're now in Patterson up on the Paskatoo Slopes, which is one of the new routes in my second edition. We head on to Beaver Dam Flats. Here we are, we're walking up to Lyndale. We came from Carburn, we've walked, we've connected two neighborhoods. You head into the heart of the city, into Mount Royal, and they just built these stairs just as my book was coming out. Phenomenal stairs from Mission up to Mount Royal. Again, excellent viewpoints. On the route that I have in Bridgeland, we cut across the escarpment and we get this view over Bridgeland. Spectacular views throughout the city. And you all know this view if you've walked in Calgary on Nose Hill. And this is the Medicine Wheel on the 14th Street, very close to the Winter Club side of Nose Hill. Again, the highest point in Calgary, spectacular views, great place to get perspective. But what's great about walking in Calgary is the way we can connect. And we have, like Dale said, we have these hidden stairways. We have them through the escarpments. We have the bridges, like that was in Sandy Beach Park. Now we're in the Britannia Slopes. This walk is part of my book, and we just go from Sandy Beach to Britannia. This is what you're seeing right now. If you head over to Britannia now, you see this view. You see these colors. We have Edworthy Park and the Douglas Fir Trail, which is a shifting trail as the water comes down the slopes from Wildwood. So it gets more interesting every year. It gets more challenging. You might need ropes next year. I don't know. But then at the end of the trail on the far east end, you get to this part, and it's coming off the Quarry Road Trail. Just a spectacular site in the city, wilderness, completely immersed. We head into Beaumont Park. And of course, this view out over Waterfall Valley. And speaking of Waterfall Valley, don't we love to have a set of stairs that heads down and then a boardwalk trail to get to the waterfall, the springs from Silver Springs coming out into Waterfall Valley. The infrastructure, though, to head into these areas, and then they've put new stairway that climbs out of Waterfall Valley with spectacular views the whole way. You're heading out to the provincial park, Glenbow Ranch, one of our newer provincial parks near Calgary. And of course, the winter is a spectacular time to head out and get these views. And then, you know, this is the summertime. No matter what season you go out in Calgary, you will have a great walkabout wherever you go. That's the fun part. It's year round. For those of you who have pups like me, like dogs that love to go out and walk and try some new areas, you got Nose Hill, which has got a ton of off-leash areas. Again, great all year round. This is in the winter. We can get the highest point, get great perspective on life, see forever. Great place to go walk. And we get to the reservoir, we have the Jackrabbit Trail, which is just below the paved path. And so I have 3 different routes in my book that are for the reservoir. 2 of them take you into the Weaselhead system, and then 1 is the circumnavigation. And this one is my favorite trail for nature in the city, and the chickadees land on your hands. They're phenomenal. You head out, you walk the pathway, and here you are. This is your view from the bridge crossing into the Weaselhead. Spectacular in the winter, spectacular year round. And here we are, we've got the reservoir from the other perspective across the dam, and that new dam bridge that has been built, because it was closed for a few years, has phenomenal views of downtown. So if you haven't been across that, circumnavigate the reservoir, add that on, and you'll get great views. And we have excellent neighborhoods, and who doesn't love a yellow house? That's my house, right on. Yes, we love walking neighborhoods for color. So color in the form of the houses, in the gardens, and this I found last week in Mount Pleasant when I was walking. The folk art, the fairy gardens, it went all around the tree. It had lighting for the evening. We have the quirky gardens, the one in Ramsey with the hubcap art. All throughout the city, you're going to find surprises around corners and the little free libraries that pop up everywhere. Sunnyside is just full of murals right now because garage art was a thing. They decided, let's get this together and let's all the neighbors come out and let's do some garage art. And they also did more public art in the neighborhood. So under the rainbow, under the C-Train bridge, these are the surprises you find in Sunnyside. Fantastic area to walk. Last year, people went big on their Christmas lights. So Crescent Heights Escarpment was the most amazing house, place to walk for Christmas lights, but this house was amazing. So hopefully this year we'll get the same thing. But like I said, it's year round, it's in the evenings, it's throughout the year, and people connect to each other and to the place. It's phenomenal. Maybe you want to have some more urban in your day. You want to go for a walkabout downtown and you go to this functional art called the Peace Bridge. And then you go search up more art in the downtown. You head down the historic 8th Avenue, Stephen Avenue Mall, and you check out historic Calgary as you head to the newer buildings in Calgary, which is the phenomenal Calgary Public Library and then the National Music Center. And then you're going to walk to my favorite mural street, the 4th Street Southeast Underpass, which is both sides of the road murals. As you head into Beltline, you're going to see murals everywhere because that's where the Festival of Murals happens, YYC Bump. A lot of people are motivated by food, so I have a lot of coffee shops in my book, like Loophole in the west end of Calgary. But you know, that's another reason people go out, to be social. And so if you can find a place, you know, you get a friend, say, let's go for a walk, have a coffee, it might get them there. And if that doesn't work, you make it ice cream, because ice cream definitely works every time, guaranteed. And this is from the new cafe in Ramsey called Good News. And you have to go there because everybody needs some good news right now, I'll tell you. That's the best soft serve ice cream I've ever had in the city. So this is from my favorite, my everyday walk where I go out Sandy Beach, looking out over from River Park over the city. And so, you know, we have a ton of reasons to go for a walk in Calgary. It's not only just to connect to the city, but to connect to our friends, to our neighbors. And we've needed that more than ever in the last year and a half. So I'm happy to have an enthusiastic approach to it. But there's more. What's next? Well, yes, I am working on another book, because we've all wanted to go out on our bikes, and with over 800 kilometers of interconnected pathway systems, we have a phenomenal network. And I'm going to redo my 2004 bike book, which I did, well, a little too long ago. So I'm working on that right now. And I'm going to take you again throughout the city, connecting not only our phenomenal bike path network, but also getting you to some great detours and destinations, whether it's the craft brewery, or the coffee shop, or it's just, you know, where to get the best bagels in the city when you're on bike, because biking is also great transportation, just like walking. And this is from the irrigation canal pathway this summer, the Western Headworks pathway. Of course, we know the Glenmore Reservoir is probably one of the most popular loops in the city, so that will be in there. And then all the quirkiness that I find as I bike through neighborhoods, and add those options to the bike routes. So right now I'm in the mapping stages. It's intense. The book is simply a big spreadsheet. So hopefully by next spring, there'll be more than a spreadsheet and it will actually look like a real book. But I always wonder if that's ever going to happen when I'm in this stage. And of course, we love Calgary year round. They clear the pathways sometimes before the roads. Some of these, like the Bow River pathway, can be cleared before you get the roads cleared. So yes, that is it. That is why you're going to want to explore Calgary, because it's spectacular, phenomenal. There's surprises around corners. Let's walk and bike. And you can find me on Instagram. That's where I do most of my stuff. And visit me at fitfrog.ca. Thanks. See ya.
Well, Lori, thank you very much. That was great too. As I said, Lori is truly Calgary's urban explorer. There's just so many things to see in this city that I didn't know they existed. My wife and I, Marilyn, we use Lori's book and all the tips to go exploring, finding new pathways. I'm looking for vistas where I can get overviews of the city. And just the other day, we were in Patterson and I saw what you just showed you there. And then at the end of our trips, I want coffee and a donut or coffee and a bagel. And that's all listed in the book. So that was really good, Lori. So Lori,
thanks so much.
Lori is my good friend and mentor, and she helped me do both books, especially the first one. I was pretty naive in trying to put out a popular book that would go to the public. And I wouldn't have been able to do it in the way it was without Lori's enthusiastic advice. So again, for that too, thank you, Lori.
Hey, you're welcome. Happy to see it's gone well.
Yeah, that's good. It's all going great. So we're coming to the end of the first part. Before we go to questions, and we do have time for questions, I'd like to the audience, if you'd like to buy any of these books, we recommend you order them from your local bookseller. And just maybe make haste, because some of the books are going to be harder to get as time goes on because of the supply chain shortage that I mentioned. Thank you very much to the authors helping us understand how to explore Alberta through the eyes of Alberta explorers. Completely different perspectives, each and every one of you. So thank you for your contributions. Don't forget to go out and support the authors. Buy your books at your local bookstore. That's so important. And then get out and explore Alberta. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.